Hélio, por favor, se eu gostaria de fazer a pergunta.
There's a question from one of the members of the Mrs. Brazil team. I'll say it first in English and then in Portuguese. Professor, according to your explanation, a monarchy tends to protect better the property of the people than a democracy. In that sense, how do you analyze the recent revolutions in the Islamic countries that aim to overtake monarchies and institute democracies? Em português, professor, de acordo com a sua explicação, uma monarquia tende a proteger melhor a propriedade privada do que uma democracia. Nesse sentido, como o senhor analisa as recentes rebeliões nos países islâmicos que visam tirar monarquias e instituir democracias?
I'm not a defender of monarchy. I'm not a monarchist. Monarchies are also states. States are rip-off organizations everywhere. But if you look at the current situation, it was interesting to see that, of course, the monarchies that were under attack handled the attacks far more successfully than those states that were dictatorial, that is considered to themselves to be public administrations, Republican administrations. That is, the situation in Morocco and Jordania is significantly better than the situation was in Libya and in Egypt, for instance, which indicates precisely what I said, that relatively speaking, and I should add, dictatorships are typically the outgrowth of democracy, democracy running into difficulties, and then the outcome of the difficulties that democracies run into is the erection of dictatorships. Dictatorships are a republican phenomenon, not a monarchical phenomenon. Hitler was certainly more democratic, so to speak, than the German Kaiser. Stalin was certainly more democratic than the Russian Tsar. The Russian Tsar was not a very nice person, but as compared to what came afterwards, he was just a marvelously nice person. Kaiser Wilhelm II was not the greatest person on earth, but as compared with Hitler, of course, he was a nice man. So we have to compare things in a balanced way. And again, the current situation seems to indicate that monarchies are by and large a better system than democracies turned into dictatorships and so forth.
Eu acredito que uma polêmica como essa merece uma pergunta bônus. Então, a gente abre para uma terceira pergunta. Alguém gostaria, aqui na plateia, por favor? O microfone, por favor, ali. Só levanta para ficar mais, por favor, para ficar mais fácil. Isso. Aqui. Oi, desculpa. Bom, fica lá, fica à vontade. A gente vai deixar, então, para amanhã, que vai ter mais um debate, a sua participação. Daí, muito obrigada, de qualquer forma. Por favor.
Good afternoon.
Maybe I should... Brazil had a monarchy also. Again, I'm not a great history buff as far as Brazil is concerned, but my impression was that if Brazil had kept the monarchy, they might be in better shape today also than they are, given that they got rid of it.
Por favor, a pergunta.
Good afternoon, Professor. I'm Marcel van Hattem. I want to ask you about disarmament. We had a huge discussion in Brazil over disarmament a few years ago, and in the end, the population of Brazil, we said no against disarmament. But recently, 2 days ago, we had here in Rio de Janeiro, I'm sure you're aware of, one of the saddest events ever in Brazilian history on a terrorist attack in a school. And, well, the deaths were yet to be counted, and the activists pro-disarmament were already stating and tweeting that disarmament of the civil population of Brazil was necessary, and if they were disarmed, I mean, if we were disarmed, unarmed, this kind of attacks wouldn't be possible in this school. So I think every one of us here has to be competent enough to defend these ideas, I mean, or to give arguments against these ideas of disarmament. What would you say about this in this very situation now we're facing here in Brazil? Because I'm sure when we get outside here, we will face another huge discussion in Brazil about unarming people. Thank you.
Again, I've heard about the incident. I'm not familiar with the details of it. It might well be, as it was in many cases in the United States, that these attacks occurred, of course, against targets where the people themselves were not armed.
Exactly.
So
yeah.
this is probably, I assume that is probably the case in Brazil also, that if these people who had been shot down would have been armed, then this crazy guy would have been killed faster, sooner, and the whole catastrophe would have been less than it actually turned out to be. In the United States, in most of these cases, it involved places where people were not allowed to be armed, and then somebody with arms coming in, killing of all sorts of people. If the schools, the universities, and so forth, where these attacks had taken place, if the employees in these places would have had weapons, well, especially concealed weapons, the attackers might have been eliminated much faster than it occurred if you have to wait for the police to come. And people who want to get weapons, criminals always get weapons. That is, when we outlaw these things, we outlaw law-abiding citizens, so to speak, to have weapons. We cannot pass a law that says, look, you criminals, you can no longer have any weapons, and then the criminals will say, oh yeah, right, I want to be a law-abiding citizen, and I do no longer want to be a criminal, and because of that, I also will no longer have any weapons.